The night had a softness that felt older than the stars, a hush that seemed to cradle every thought before it could drift away. In a quiet corner of the universe, a little girl named Beth lay awake beneath a ceiling that glimmered faintly, as if the sky had bent low just for her. She could hear the summer wind pressing against the windows, carrying the scent of warm soil and something stranger, like the faint spark of metal touched by moonlight. It was the kind of scent that asked a question without words, and she felt it settle deep inside her chest. You are loved here, right now, in this small, soft moment. Truly loved. And we care for you more than you might guess. Before we begin this wandering tale, tell us, where in the world are you listening from and what time is it there? Now let's drift together into the gentle cosmos. Beth's earliest memory was not a single event, but a quiet glow. Her father's shadow would appear in the barn long after midnight, a silhouette framed by the half-open door. Sometimes she woke to a muted hum, like the low singing of a faraway star. She never asked what he was building because the mystery felt almost sacred. Instead, she would press her small hand to the cool glass of her window and simply watch. Rick was a man of shifting tides. Some evenings he came home smelling faintly of pine and rain, other times of smoke and strange metals. He rarely spoke about where he'd been, yet his eyes always held a restless gleam, as if entire galaxies had just whispered secrets only he could hear. Beth didn't understand those secrets, but she understood the way his shoulders softened when she hugged him. When morning light spilled across the kitchen floor, Rick might be gone again. Her mother would brew tea and hum half-remembered songs, the kind that sounded like they had been sung for centuries. Beth would sit at the table, tracing patterns in the steam and imagining the places her father's boots had touched while she dreamed. She never felt abandoned. Instead, she felt a strange, tender certainty that he was weaving something important, even if she could not name it. As days passed, small oddities began to bloom like night flowers. The barn lights flickered in colors she had no name for. Tools rearranged themselves while no one watched. Once, when Beth leaned too close, she thought she heard a door sighing open inside a wall. These were not frightening moments. They were invitations, soft murmurs asking her to look closer at the edges of the world. Sometimes she would lie back in the tall grass behind the house, staring at the sky until stars blurred into gentle rivers of silver. In those moments, she felt the universe breathing with her, slow and deep, as if it too wanted her to rest. The crickets formed a quiet chorus, and the cool earth beneath her carried a pulse she trusted without question. She did not know it then, but these evenings were shaping her heart. They were teaching her to listen for what could not be spoken, to hold wonder without needing answers. The night and the hum and the smell of starlight became her first language, a lullaby she carried in the smallest corners of her mind. And somewhere beyond the hush, Rick kept working, moving through shadows and starlit roads, a father whose love was hidden in every unspoken gesture. Beth felt it all the same, like a constellation only she could trace, glowing quietly just beyond the edge of sight. Summer ripened slowly that year, the air warm and heavy with the scent of clover and distant rain. Beth spent her days wandering the edges of the property where fences sagged and the grass grew wild enough to hide her ankles. She carried a small notebook her mother had given her, its pages lined but mostly blank, and she filled it with sketches of clouds and questions she could not speak aloud. The questions always circled the same quiet mystery. Who was her father when he vanished into the night, and what song lived in the machines he built? Rick came and went like a traveling star. Some afternoons he appeared without a sound, wiping grease from his hands as though he had only stepped outside for a moment. He would smile at Beth in a way that felt both proud and distracted, like a man balancing entire galaxies behind his eyes. He never offered stories of where he had been, but sometimes, when she asked a simple thing, how does the moon stay up there? Or why does lightning smell like metal? He would crouch beside her and whisper explanations that felt like tiny spells. His words always carried a shimmer, leaving her heart buzzing long after the conversation ended. One dusky evening she followed him without meaning to. He walked toward the barn while the horizon blushed violet, his figure long and deliberate against the fading light. Beth padded after him through the tall grass, careful to step only where his footsteps pressed the earth. From the doorway, she watched as he lifted a strange device, its frame bending light around itself like a thin ripple of water. The hum she'd heard on countless nights was louder here, steady and low, like the sound of the world breathing. Rick glanced back, his eyes catching hers. For a heartbeat, she expected him to scold her, but instead he only tilted his head as if to say, "It's all right." He gestured her closer with a small motion of his hand. Beth felt the night tighten and soften all at once. She stepped inside. The air was cool and alive. Tiny motes of blue light floated like slow-moving fireflies. The device shimmered, a door that was not a door, and Beth thought she heard faint music, notes stretched so thin they were almost silence. She reached for Rick's sleeve. He knelt to her level and whispered, "Some places can't be explained, kiddo." "They just are." Beth didn't ask for more. She pressed her palm to the warm metal and felt it pulse against her skin, a heartbeat hidden within machinery. The sensation settled deep inside her, neither frightening nor strange, just real, like the certainty of dawn. Rick watched her with a softness she would remember long after. When they returned to the house, the world felt changed. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and late summer rain. Her mother hummed quietly, as if she too sensed the lingering hum. Beth sat at the table, still feeling the heartbeat in her palm. She realized that night that some mysteries were meant to be carried rather than solved, and that understanding could bloom without a single answer spoken aloud. Outside, the first stars emerged, bright and unhurried. Beth leaned against the window pane and whispered a promise to herself. To keep listening, to keep noticing the gentle edges of wonder, no matter where her father wandered. The universe seemed to lean closer, as if it heard her vow and approved. Autumn crept in without announcement, soft and amber gold, and the air around the house began to smell of drying leaves and distant smoke. Beth felt taller somehow, not just in height, but in the quiet ways a heart expands when it starts to understand the world. Mornings grew crisp. She would wake to the rustle of branches and the faint echo of her father's tools long before dawn. The hum in the barn never ceased. It became a steady comfort, like the low rhythm of her own breath. At school, she moved through days like a dream. Teachers praised her for noticing details others missed, the flicker of a candle in a draft, the subtle change in a classmate's eyes before they spoke. Friends teased her gently, calling her the quiet watcher, but she only smiled. She knew her attentiveness was a gift, though she could not explain where it came from. Perhaps it was born from nights spent listening to stars, or from the way Rick always seemed to speak in half-finished thoughts that begged to be completed in silence. One afternoon, when the sky glowed a heavy grey and rain traced silver lines across the glass, Beth lingered after class to help a boy gather papers scattered by the wind. His name was Samuel, and he thanked her with a shy warmth that settled somewhere deep in her chest. They began walking home together, their conversations gentle and unhurried. He told her stories of old trees and hidden creeks. She spoke of clouds that looked like sleeping animals. There was no rush to define their friendship. It existed like a small candle, steady and calm, Rick noticed. One evening, while tightening a coil of wire, he asked in his gravelly way, "You like that kid?" Beth blushed and shrugged. Rick's eyes softened. "Good. Keep people close who see the world the way you do." They'll help you stay awake to the quiet things." He didn't elaborate, but his words lodged themselves in her memory like seeds waiting for spring. Weeks passed. Leaves turned the color of copper light and fell in slow spirals. Beth and Samuel explored the woods behind the house, following paths of moss that felt older than history. Sometimes they found small clearings where the air hummed faintly, almost like the barn's secret pulse. Beth would close her eyes and listen, certain the earth itself was whispering. Samuel never laughed. He simply listened with her, his breath joining hers in a shared silence. One night, a restless wind swept through the valley. Beth woke to find the barn door ajar, moonlight spilling across the floor in thin silver blades. Inside, the device Rick had built glowed with a soft, steady blue. Rick stood before it, shoulders bowed, eyes distant. Beth stepped beside him without a word. He rested a hand on her head, gentle and brief. "Some journeys," he murmured, "don't have maps. You just keep walking until you feel the sky change." Beth thought of Samuel, of her mother's songs, of the endless hush of stars. She felt the truth in her father's voice like a warm current. They stood together for a long while, neither needing to speak. The machine pulsed quietly, a heartbeat shared between worlds. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The air smelled clean, and the first light of morning threaded through the clouds like soft gold. Beth carried the night's stillness with her, a reminder that love and mystery could share the same gentle space. She knew that whatever paths awaited, friendship, wonder, or the quiet unknown, she would follow them with an open heart. Winter arrived in whispers, a soft silver breath that wrapped the valley in frost and muted every sound. Beth woke each morning to windows traced with delicate ice, the patterns like tiny constellations waiting to be named. The world outside seemed slowed, as if time itself had settled under a heavy blanket. She moved through the cold with quiet wonder, noticing how each breath lingered in the air like a small cloud, how every branch held its own fragile sculpture of snow. Rick's visits became rarer as the nights lengthened. When he did appear, his coat carried the scent of strange winds, ozone and far-off rainstorms, as though he'd been walking among storms that belonged to other worlds. He spoke little, but his eyes, bright and restless, always softened when they found hers. Sometimes he brought gifts that were not quite gifts, a fragment of glass that glowed faintly in darkness, a feather that shimmered like frozen moonlight. He never explained where they came from. Beth simply tucked them away in a wooden box beneath her bed, small treasures of unspoken stories. School days unfolded with a quiet rhythm. Samuel still walked with her, their footsteps crunching across icy paths. He told her about his grandmother's garden sleeping under the snow, about dreams of rivers that ran warm even in winter. Beth listened, her own words gentle and few. She felt the bond between them deepen not through grand declarations but through small acts. A shared thermos of tea, a silence that felt like companionship rather than absence. One evening, as dusk painted the sky a soft violet, Beth followed the familiar hum to the barn. The door creaked beneath her mittened hand. Inside, the machine glowed with a colder light than before, pale, almost translucent, like the inside of an opal. Rick stood beside it, his shoulders hunched, as if bearing a weight no one else could see. He turned when she entered, his breath visible in the chilled air. "Beth," he said quietly, "the universe doesn't wait for us to be ready. It just keeps moving." She stepped closer, sensing the ache beneath his words. "Will you be gone long this time?" she asked. Rick's smile flickered, a fragile thing. "Maybe, maybe not. What matters is you keep noticing the world, no matter where I am." Beth wanted to protest, to ask for promises he couldn't give. But the hum of the machine filled the space between them, steady and low, like a heartbeat she had always known. She reached for his hand, small inside his weathered grip. For a moment they stood that way, the cold air and quiet light binding them together. Later, after he slipped once more into the endless elsewhere, Beth lingered in the barn alone. The glow dimmed but never vanished. She touched the machine's smooth surface and felt a warmth that defied the winter air, a reminder of her father's presence even in absence. It pulsed faintly beneath her palm, a living echo of love. Outside, snow began to fall, slow, unhurried flakes that caught in her hair and melted on her lashes. She tilted her face to the sky, letting the hush of the storm wash through her. In that silent snowfall, she felt both the vastness of space and the closeness of home, as if the universe itself had leaned down to whisper that she was never truly alone. When she returned to the house, her mother was humming by the fire, the melody low and warm. Samuel would visit the next day with a basket of winter apples, and the world would keep turning, gentle and unbound. Beth carried the night's quiet into her dreams, a slow and steady promise that wonder could survive any distance. Spring returned with a hush of rain, soft and patient, as though the earth itself exhaled after the long cold. Buds swelled on branches like tiny lanterns, and the air shimmered with the smell of wet soil and distant blossoms. Beth felt the season before she saw it, the way the wind carried warmth again, the way the night sky deepened into a velvet blue that promised growth. Each morning she woke to birdsong threaded with the memory of winter's quiet, a music both new and familiar. Rick remained mostly a rumor in those early weeks. His visits were brief, almost like dreams she half remembered upon waking. Sometimes Beth caught the faint ozone scent that announced his arrival long before she saw him, and once she found a scrap of paper tucked into her notebook, a single line written in his sharp hand, "Keep listening to the small things. They'll guide you when I can't." She held the note like a heartbeat, reading it over and over, until the ink felt like part of her skin. School tilted toward its final months. Samuel and Beth wandered the softening woods where puddles mirrored the clouds and tiny frogs stirred among the reeds. They spoke of quiet futures, gardens they might plant, rivers they might follow. Samuel's laugh had deepened over the winter, a low, warm sound that wrapped around her thoughts. Sometimes they walked without speaking, letting the rush of meltwater and the sigh of wind do the talking for them. Those silences felt richer than any words. One rainy afternoon, Beth stayed late to help her mother mend an old quilt. As they worked, her mother began to hum a tune Beth recognized from childhood, the same melody Rick sometimes whistled when he thought no one was listening. The sound filled the room with a tender ache. Beth paused, needle poised, and asked, "Did Dad teach you that song?" Her mother smiled, eyes distant. "Maybe he learned it from me. Maybe I learned it from him. Some songs just find their way into a family." That night the barn called to her again. She followed the familiar trail of humming air until the door eased open. The machine glowed with a warmer light than before, golden, like captured sunlight. Rick stood there, coat damp with rain, hair untamed. He turned as if he had been waiting. "You've grown," he said softly, as though he meant more than height. Beth stepped closer, her shoes sinking into damp straw. "You left me a note." Rick's eyes softened, a flicker of pride and sorrow mingling like dawn and dusk.
"I knew you'd hear it," he murmured.
Sometimes words are just echoes of what we already know. She wanted to ask where he'd been, why he always left, but the questions felt small against the quiet glow. Instead, she said, "Will you stay a while?" "For tonight," he answered, and that was enough. They stood together in the golden hum, father and daughter, listening to the pulse of the machine and the slow drip of rain from the rafters. Beth felt the rhythm of the universe settle into her bones, a steady, forgiving beat that held them both. When morning came, Rick was gone again, leaving only the fading warmth of the machine and a new calm in Beth's chest. Outside, the world smelled of wet grass and new beginnings. She carried the night with her, a gentle certainty that love could be both near and far, present and wandering, and still be whole. Summer stretched wide and slow.
A haze of honeyed light draped across the valley.
The fields behind the house glimmered with tall grass that swayed like a quiet sea, and each evening the horizon blushed with colors too soft to name. Beth moved through the days with a calm she had never known, her senses tuned to the hush between sounds, the pause before a bird called, the delicate rustle of leaves when the wind changed its mind. It felt as if the world itself was breathing alongside her, a companion she could trust. Rick's visits became unpredictable, but no longer startling. Sometimes he appeared in the pale blue of dawn, sipping coffee while the sky unfolded. Other times he arrived after dark, smelling faintly of ozone and far-off storms. He still said little about where he had been, but his eyes lingered on Beth with a new steadiness, as if measuring the quiet strength she had gathered in his absence. Each time he left, she felt less like a child waiting and more like a keeper of the space between his journeys. Samuel remained a gentle constant. They wandered the softened trails through the woods, the summer air warm on their shoulders. He brought a small wooden flute he had carved himself, and its notes floated like drifting petals above the murmur of cicadas. Sometimes they sat by the creek, their feet in cool water, speaking in fragments about dreams they hardly dared to name, gardens by the sea, endless libraries, skies where new constellations waited to be found. Beth felt the bond between them deepen in these small confessions, a quiet promise woven through the sound of flowing water. One evening, a warm rain began just as twilight settled. Beth and Samuel raced across the meadow, laughing softly, the drops warm against their skin. They took shelter beneath the old oak near the barn, where the hum of the hidden machine threaded through the patter of rain. Samuel tilted his head, listening. "It always sounds alive," he whispered. Beth only nodded, knowing the sound had lived in her heart long before she shared it. Later that night, the barn door stood open as if expecting her. Rick was there, adjusting a slender coil of silver light that curved like a river. The glow painted his face with a calm she rarely saw. "You hear it too, don't you?" he asked without turning. "Yes," Beth answered.
"It's like a heartbeat," Rick smiled faintly. "Everything worth finding has one." He glanced at her, a rare softness in his expression.
"You're learning to listen better than I ever did." Beth stepped closer, the warmth of the machine radiating like late afternoon sun. "Will it ever be finished?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, tightening a final bolt. "But finishing isn't the point. It's about keeping the door open even if you never walk through." They stood side by side as the rain eased outside, the barn filled with a quiet golden pulse. Beth felt the truth of his words settle deep within her. Some journeys were not meant to end, only to keep unfolding. When she finally returned to the house, the storm had washed the night clean. Samuel waited on the porch, hair damp, eyes bright. He didn't ask where she'd been. Instead, he reached out his hand and she took it, the silence between them warm as the summer air. In her room, Beth lay awake listening to the softened world, the fading rain, the distant hum, the slow rhythm of her own heart. She understood that her father's wandering and her own quiet path were bound by the same unseen thread, a promise of wonder that needed no answers, only faith in the gentle unfolding of time. Autumn arrived again, slow and amber, carrying the scent of ripe apples and cool earth. The fields behind the house turned copper and gold, and the sky stretched wider, as though the world itself were opening a quiet door. Beth felt older, though she could not name the change. Her thoughts drifted like the soft fog that rolled in each morning. and she welcomed the hush of shorter days, the way twilight painted everything in gentle mystery. Rick's visits became like passing comets, brief flashes of light that left long echoes. He would appear at unexpected hours, his coat smelling faintly of starlight and metal rain. Each time, Beth noticed how his eyes lingered on her with a new, unspoken pride. He spoke little, but his presence felt steadier, as though the great, restless engine inside him had slowed just enough to share a moment. Samuel, ever a quiet companion, remained close. Together they wandered through orchards heavy with fruit, their footsteps muffled by fallen leaves. He told her stories of old songs sung by migrating birds, and she listened with the same patient wonder she had learned from nights in the barn. Sometimes they sat beneath the oak tree near the creek, exchanging nothing but silence while the world around them breathed. Their friendship had deepened into something softer, not yet named, but warm as the last light of day. One evening, Beth followed the familiar hum back to the barn. The door opened easily, revealing a glow that seemed to shift with the seasons, a mellow amber that wrapped the air in quiet warmth. Rick stood beside the machine, his silhouette sharp against the light. Without turning, he said, "You've been listening?" "I always listen," Beth replied. Rick glanced back, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "That's why you'll understand what most people miss. The universe doesn't shout, it whispers." Beth stepped closer, feeling the pulse of the machine resonate through the wooden floor. "Are you leaving again?" she asked softly. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight I just needed to remember why I started all of this." He rested a hand on the machine, and for a heartbeat it seemed to glow brighter, like a star drawing breath. "Sometimes I forget the point isn't the traveling.
It's this.
Sharing the quiet with someone who sees it." They stood together as the evening deepened, the barn alive with a gentle rhythm. Beth felt the warmth of her father's presence settle over her like a blanket. She wanted to tell him that his quiet gifts had shaped her heart, that she had learned to see the world's hidden music because of him. Instead, she simply reached out and touched his sleeve. He placed his hand over hers, a silent acknowledgement that needed no words. Later, she found Samuel waiting by the porch steps, the lantern light tracing the curve of his smile. He didn't ask where she'd been.
He never needed to.
They walked beneath the moonlit trees, their breaths clouding the cool air. Samuel finally spoke, his voice low. "When I'm with you, the world feels bigger." Beth looked up at the stars, remembering her father's words.
"It's always been big," she whispered.
"We're just learning to notice." They lingered beneath the vast sky until the chill urged them home. That night, as Beth lay in bed, she felt the steady hum of the machine echo through the quiet house, a pulse that matched her own. She understood that some connections were not bound by distance or time. They lived in the spaces between heartbeats, in the hush before dawn, in the silent promise of stars that would keep shining long after she slept. Winter crept in with a silver patience, frosting the edges of windows and laying a hush across the fields. The world seemed to hold its breath, every sound softened by snow and the muted glow of a pale sky. Beth woke each morning to the quiet, her breath a small cloud, her thoughts drifting like flakes that refused to settle. She felt the weight of time differently now, not as a burden, but as a slow, endless tide carrying her forward. Rick came less often, though his presence lingered like a memory that refused to fade. When he did appear, he looked weathered but peaceful, as if the cold had stripped away everything unnecessary. He spoke of distant places in fragments, a city made of glass where no shadows could hide, a storm of violet lightning that sang in a language only machines understood. Yet, always he returned to silence, standing beside her in the kitchen or by the fire, as if words were too small for what he wished to share. Samuel remained a steady figure in her days. They shoveled paths through heavy snow, their laughter sending soft echoes through the empty air. At night, they read old books by lamplight, the golden glow warming the corners of the room. Sometimes Beth caught him watching her with a quiet intensity that made her heart tighten. They never named the feeling, but it lived between them like a fragile flame. One night, drawn by a familiar vibration, Beth ventured to the barn. The door creaked beneath her touch, revealing the machine alive in a cold blue glow. Rick stood there, his coat dusted with snow, his eyes reflecting a distant galaxy of thoughts. "You hear it too," he said. "Without turning. I always hear it," Beth replied. He nodded, as though this was the answer he had been waiting for.
"I'm leaving again. Longer this time, maybe?"
Much longer. The words settled like falling snow, silent and inevitable. Beth stepped closer, her breath catching. "Will you come back?" Rick's gaze softened.
"Everywhere I go, a part of me is already here."
"You'll feel it, like a heartbeat under the stars." Beth wanted to hold him, to anchor him to the world they shared, but she knew she couldn't. Some spirits were made to wander. Instead, she touched the sleeve of his coat, the fabric cold and damp from the night. "Then I'll listen," she whispered. He smiled, a small, fleeting curve of the mouth that held a lifetime of love. "That's all I could ever ask." The machine pulsed brighter, filling the barn with a light that seemed to hum with endless horizons. Rick stepped into the glow, his figure blurring until he was nothing but a shimmer against the blue. Then, as softly as a breath, he was gone. Beth stood in the quiet that followed, the cold pressing close, the machine fading to a soft, silent heartbeat. She felt no panic, only a deep, resonant calm. The universe whispered through the rafters, a soundless promise that he was never truly lost. Later, she walked back to the house where Samuel waited by the fire. He rose as she entered, his eyes searching hers. She said nothing, but he seemed to understand. He reached for her hand, and she let him hold it, their fingers lacing together like roots beneath the snow. Outside, the night stretched wide and star-filled. Beth listened to the silence until she could hear the faint, eternal hum of the cosmos, a music that bound every heart, every star, every wandering soul. She closed her eyes and let it carry her forward. Spring returned in a hush of rain and soft green shoots, the earth loosening beneath gentle sun. Beth felt the shift before the first crocus bloomed, a quiet quickening in the soil and in her own heartbeat. The world, once brittle with winter, now breathed with patient color. Each morning the fields stretched wider, the air scented with thawed earth and distant blossoms. Samuel remained at her side, their days threaded with simple rituals, repairing fences, tending seedlings, sharing bread warm from the oven. Their silence had ripened into something sure and unspoken, a language of shared glances and the brush of hands. Sometimes, when evening settled like a slow exhale, Beth caught his gaze and felt the promise of a life unfolding, not with fireworks but with steady light. Yet the hum beneath the house never left her. On soft nights, she would step into the barn, the door sighing open to reveal the dormant machine. It no longer glowed with the restless energy of travel. Instead, it pulsed faintly, like a heart sleeping beneath the world. Each time she stood there, Beth sensed Rick's presence, distant yet near, a thread running through the dark. One dusk, while the sky deepened to violet, the machine stirred.
A single note, low and resonant, filled the barn.
Beth felt it through her bones, an echo of the night he'd left. The air shimmered faintly, carrying the scent of rain and starlight. She closed her eyes and listened. A voice, not quite sound, brushed her thoughts. "Keep listening." It was neither command nor farewell, but a quiet blessing. Her chest tightened, not in grief, but recognition. Rick had always taught her to hear the hidden music of the universe. Now he was part of that music, infinite and unbound. She stayed until the glow softened and the barn settled again. When she stepped outside, Samuel waited at the edge of the path, lantern light flickering against the new grass.
You felt it, didn't you?
He asked, his voice low. Beth nodded. He's still out there, everywhere. Samuel offered his hand. Then we'll keep listening together. They walked back toward the house, the world around them alive with spring's quiet miracles. Frogs sang in distant ponds, and the night air carried the scent of wet earth and beginnings. Beth felt the rhythm of it all, the soil, the stars, the breath of someone she loved stretched across galaxies. In her heart, she knew Rick was not lost to the void. He had become part of the great, endless song, and through that song she would always find him. The universe whispered through every leaf and every breeze, a reminder that nothing truly ends. As they reached the porch, Samuel squeezed her hand, grounding her in the present. Beth looked up at the sky, where the first stars pierced the velvet dark, and smiled. The hum was everywhere now, steady as the turning of the seasons, as eternal as love itself. The summer fields shimmered under a slow, honey-colored dusk, every blade of grass holding the day's warmth like a secret. Beth walked the narrow path beyond the barn, her bare feet brushing the soft earth, and felt the hum of the world settle into her chest. It was quieter now than the nights when the machine had first sung to her, but the memory of that music lingered in the air. An echo threaded through cricket calls and the sigh of distant trees. Samuel followed a step behind, carrying a lantern that cast a gentle circle of gold around them. They rarely spoke during these twilight walks. Words felt too heavy for the tender hush between heartbeats. Instead, they shared small glances, the rhythm of breathing, the comfort of knowing the other was near. Beth sometimes thought of those silences as the truest conversation they could have. The stars began their slow unveiling, each one a patient spark of ancient fire. Beth tilted her head back and tried to imagine how many worlds lay beyond those points of light, how many stories unfolded unseen. Somewhere among them, she believed, Rick drifted, a restless spirit wrapped in equations and wonder. She didn't picture him as a ghost or a god, more like a quiet current moving through the universe, guiding her without chains or demands. A breeze carried the scent of ripening fruit from the orchard. Samuel reached for her hand, his thumb tracing slow circles against her skin. "He's watching, isn't he?" he murmured. Beth smiled, a soft curve that held both certainty and peace. "He's listening," she said. "The way the stars listen." The way the earth does. They reached the old wooden gate where the path met the meadow. Beyond it, the world opened into a silvered expanse of grass, whispering beneath the night. Beth leaned against the gate, the worn wood warm from the day's sun. Memories came like gentle waves, childhood afternoons with her father, the smell of metal and ozone when the machine stirred, the laughter of impossible adventures she had never taken but somehow remembered. Samuel rested the lantern on a post, and its glow wove with starlight until the horizon blurred. "Do you ever wish you'd gone with him?" he asked quietly. Beth considered the question like a stone in her palm. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I think, if I had, I might never have learned how wide this small life can be." The meadow shimmered as if it understood. A single firefly blinked near her wrist, then another, until the field glowed with tiny wandering stars. Beth felt her heartbeat match their silent rhythm. The hum returned, soft, steady, like the sound of distant rain, threading through the night as if the universe itself breathed around them. She closed her eyes and listened. In that vast, gentle silence, she heard it again, not a voice, but a knowing. Rick's presence, not bound by body or place, flowing through the dark like a lullaby. It asked nothing of her. It only offered the reminder that love, once formed, never leaves. When she opened her eyes, Samuel was watching her with quiet understanding. He lifted the lantern and whispered, "Let's stay a little longer." So they did, standing in the meadow as the night deepened and the fireflies danced their patient ballet. Beth felt the years stretch forward like a calm river, carrying every memory, every small act of kindness, every gentle promise. She thought of how Rick had once told her that the universe is just a story of connections, each spark of life linked by unseen threads. Here, under a sky of endless sparks, Beth finally believed him. Morning arrived like a soft confession, the first light slipping over the hills in shades of rose and pale gold. Beth woke to the hush of a world still half asleep, the windows open to a breeze carrying the scent of dew and ripening grain. She lay for a long while, listening to the low creak of the house, the far-off murmur of doves, the steady rhythm of Samuel's breathing beside her. Each sound felt like a promise that the universe continued, quiet and vast. When she rose, the floor was cool beneath her feet, grounding her in the small holiness of the day. She moved through the kitchen where the kettle whispered on the stove, steam lifting like a gentle ghost. Outside, the orchard waited in soft morning shadow, and she carried her tea to the porch where the air shimmered with the scent of wet earth. The hum was faint now, more memory than vibration, but she felt it as surely as her own pulse. Samuel joined her with a loaf of bread, still warm from the oven. They ate without hurry, sharing small smiles. After breakfast they wandered to the garden, where the tomatoes swelled on their vines, and bees traced lazy arcs among the flowers. Beth touched each leaf with a kind of reverence, remembering the restless girl who once searched the sky for her father's impossible footsteps. Now she found wonder in the quiet unfolding of a bud, the patient labor of soil and rain. By midday, the sun spread a silver warmth across the meadow. They walked the familiar path to the gate, lantern left behind, no need for its glow. The sky stretched endless and blue, and Beth felt the years folding gently around her like soft cloth. Samuel slipped his hand into hers, their fingers fitting together as naturally as the breeze through the grass. They sat beneath the old oak tree where the earth smelled of moss and thyme. Beth closed her eyes and drifted into a half-sleep, the world a lullaby of rustling leaves and distant bird calls. In that quiet, the hum returned, not as sound, but as a feeling that lived between heartbeats. She sensed Rick there, not as a figure, but as a vast kindness, the echo of starlight and all the unspoken love that once filled their home. Keep listening. The words were softer than thought, a ripple across the surface of her mind. Beth let them settle, not searching for meaning. It was enough to know that connection remained, invisible but unbroken. When she opened her eyes, Samuel watched her with calm understanding. "You heard him?" he said, not as a question, but as a gentle truth. She nodded.
He's everywhere.
In the air, in the soil, in every breath we take. They stayed until the shadows grew long, and the first evening star pierced the sky. Walking home, Beth felt the quiet strength of the world beneath her, each step a thread woven into an endless tapestry. She thought of Rick not as lost, but as part of the great turning, neither beginning nor end.
Only continuation. That night, lying beside Samuel,
She listened once more to the house settling around them, to the slow rhythm of life unfolding without urgency. The hum within her softened into something like a heartbeat, carrying her towards sleep. She understood at last that her search had never been about finding a single person, but about learning the infinite ways love remains. As dreams gathered, Beth smiled into the dark. Somewhere, in the vast quiet beyond the stars, her father smiled too. Autumn crept across the valley with a painter's patience, washing the hills in amber and deep wine. Each morning, mist threaded through the orchard like a slow-moving river, and Beth welcomed the chill that followed her steps. The air smelled of fallen leaves and distant rain, carrying a hush that felt older than memory. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stood on the porch, letting the day unfold like a quiet revelation. Samuel joined her, his hands warm around a mug of tea. They spoke little, their breaths rising in pale clouds that vanished into the crisp sky. The season itself seemed to speak for them, a language of fading greens, of harvest and gentle surrender. Beth felt time settling around her, not as weight, but as a soft blanket. Later they walked the familiar path beyond the barn, where the grasses bowed under the first frost. The machine inside the barn no longer glowed. It rested as though it, too, had accepted the long exhale of the year. Yet the hum remained, subtle as a heartbeat. Beth paused to listen, the sound threading through wind and sparrow song. It no longer called her outward. It simply existed, steady and kind. She remembered her father's laughter, the wild stories that once kept her awake with wonder. Those memories no longer ached. They flowed through her like a quiet stream, each ripple carrying love that distance could not dim. Rick was not a figure she sought now, but a presence woven through every breath, as sure as the turning seasons. They reached the old oak tree where they had spent countless evenings. Leaves fell around them in slow spirals, their colors catching the late sunlight like embers. Samuel spread a blanket, and they sat together while the world softened into twilight. He rested his head against her shoulder, and Beth felt the simple rightness of the moment, the shared warmth, the earth beneath, the endless sky above. "Do you miss him differently now?" Samuel asked, his voice barely louder than the rustle of leaves. Beth considered the question, tracing a finger across the fabric of the blanket.
"I don't think of it as missing anymore," she said. "It's more like carrying."
"He's part of everything, so he's never gone." A hush settled between them, deeper than silence. The first star blinked awake, followed by
another and another, until the heavens glimmered like scattered seeds of light.
Beth closed her eyes and felt the universe breathe. The hum merged with her own heartbeat, a slow and endless rhythm that asked for nothing but presence. When she opened her eyes, the night was fully born. Fireflies sparked along the meadow's edge, tiny lanterns echoing the stars. Samuel squeezed her hand, grounding her in the moment, and she sensed how the years ahead would stretch, ordinary and luminous all at once. They lingered until the cold pressed gently against their cheeks. On the walk back, the world felt both vast and intimate, every shadow carrying the quiet assurance that nothing truly ends. Inside, the house welcomed them with the scent of wood smoke and the soft creak of settling beams. Beth paused at the doorway, listening once more. The hum was everywhere, within the walls, the earth, the night itself. It needed no explanation. It was love, infinite and unbroken. As she lay beside Samuel, drowsiness wrapped her like a second blanket. The final thought before sleep was simple and full. She had found what she was searching for. Not in distance or in stars, but here, in the quiet heartbeat of the world. Winter settled like a slow breath over the valley, each snowfall a soft rewriting of the world. Beth woke to a hush so complete it felt sacred, the windows framed in delicate frost. The orchard stood bare and silver, branches etched against a sky the color of pearl. She lingered beneath the quilts, listening to the muted creak of the house and the faint crackle of the hearth, each sound a tender reminder that life continues even in stillness. When she finally rose, the floor chilled her feet, grounding her in the present moment. Samuel had already stoked the fire, and the scent of wood smoke drifted through the quiet rooms. They shared breakfast without words, the kind of silence that needs no filling. Outside, the world waited beneath a blanket of white, and Beth felt the peace of a landscape holding its breath. Later they walked beyond the barn, the snow crunching softly under their boots. The machine inside remained dormant, draped in a pale shimmer of frost, yet the hum was there, subtle as a heartbeat beneath the earth. Beth paused, laying a gloved hand on the door. She felt not a call but a presence, steady and warm despite the winter air. Memories rose like gentle tides, her father's wry smile, the unspoken lessons hidden in his restless adventures, the nights she had watched stars with a child's wondering eyes.
None of it ached now. It simply existed, a living thread woven through her days.
Rick was everywhere, within the hush of falling snow, within the endless sky. They reached the old oak tree, its bare limbs black against the pale horizon. Samuel spread a blanket on the trunk's sheltered side, and they sat together, sharing the silence of the season. Breath plumed white in the still air. The world around them glowed faintly, every snowflake catching the last week's sunlight. "Do you ever feel like he's closer when it's this quiet?" Samuel asked, his voice low as the drifting wind. Beth nodded, eyes fixed on the fading light. "Yes. It's as if the whole world listens with me." They stayed until the first stars shimmered, distant fires in a frozen sky. Beth closed her eyes and felt the hum again, slow and endless, a rhythm that matched her own pulse. She understood with a certainty beyond words that love needs no movement, no proof. It simply is. On the walk home, moonlight turned the snow to silver. Each step was soft, each breath a small cloud that vanished into the night. Inside, the house welcomed them with warmth and the smell of pine. Beth stood at the window a while longer, watching flakes drift like quiet prayers. As she lay beside Samuel, she felt time fold gently around her, neither beginning nor ending. The search that once defined her had become something vaster, a knowing that connection is eternal, that every heartbeat echoes across stars. Her final waking thought was a simple truth, tender and complete. Nothing loved is ever lost. Spring returned with a hush of rain, soft as a whispered promise. The valley stirred beneath a veil of mist, and the first buds opened like small green lanterns along the orchard's limbs. Beth woke to birdsong weaving through the pale morning light, each note carrying the quiet joy of renewal. She lingered beneath the quilt for a heartbeat, sensing the world's slow exhale, then rose to meet the day. The house was warm with the scent of bread Samuel had set to rise before dawn. He greeted her with a smile that needed no words, the kind of smile that held seasons within it. They shared tea at the kitchen table, steam spiraling upward like a gentle prayer. Outside, droplets clung to the window glass, refracting the light into soft halos. Later, they walked to the barn. The machine stood exactly as it had through every season, silent, patient, layered with a fine film of dust. Beth brushed her fingertips across its surface, feeling a subtle vibration, as if the metal remembered. The hum was no longer a sound she strained to hear. It was part of her, steady as her heartbeat. She thought of Rick, not as a figure to chase, but as a presence stitched into the fabric of everything. His laughter seemed to ripple through the budding branches, his restless wonder echoing in the call of distant doves. The ache of searching had long since softened into something else, a calm acceptance that love does not vanish. It simply changes shape. They followed the familiar path to the old oak tree. New leaves shimmered in the damp breeze, their green so tender it almost glowed. Samuel took her hand, and together they stood beneath the branches, feeling the pulse of life returning. He would have liked this morning. Samuel said quietly. Beth smiled, a quiet curve of memory. He's part of it, she replied. Every spring, every leaf. They remained there as the clouds thinned and sunlight spilled across the meadow. Beth closed her eyes and listened. The hum within her aligned with the rhythm of the earth, a soft, looping song of beginnings without end. She felt Rick there, not as distance, but as nearness beyond touch. When they returned home, the day unfolded with gentle simplicity, bread cooling on the windowsill, the scent of rain fading into sunlight, the orchard alive with small awakenings. Beth moved through it all with an easy grace. Every motion a quiet conversation with the universe. That evening, as stars pricked the deepening sky, she sat on the porch and watched the world settle into night. Samuel joined her, and they said little. Silence was enough. The hum was everywhere, in the breeze, in the dark soil, in the steady beat of their heart. Beth knew then that her journey had never been about finding a single person in a single place. It was about understanding that nothing loved is ever truly gone. The seasons would turn, the stars would burn and fade, and still the connection would remain, vast and unbroken. She leaned her head against Samuel's shoulder, feeling the quiet strength of the moment. The universe breathed with them, infinite and kind. Summer unfurled with a gentle glow, each dawn spilling honeyed light across the valley. The orchard hummed with bees and the soft rustle of ripening fruit, the air warm and fragrant with grass and distant rain. Beth woke early, the windows open to a breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. She lay still for a while, listening to the low murmur of the world, feeling its quiet heartbeat match her own. Samuel was already in the kitchen when she rose, a pot of tea steaming beside freshly cut bread. They shared breakfast in the familiar hush, their smiles small and certain. Outside, the morning shimmered with the promise of long golden hours. Later they walked to the barn, where the machine rested beneath a drift of sunlight and dust. Beth touched its cool surface, sensing the faint vibration that had once felt mysterious, but now seemed like an old friend. The hum no longer called her anywhere. It simply was a part of the earth, a part of her. She thought of Rick not as a traveler or a seeker, but as a thread woven through every moment. His laughter lived in the soft buzz of the bees, his wonder in the endless blue above. The years of searching had softened into a quiet knowing. Love does not fade. It becomes the air you breathe, the sky you watch, the soil beneath your feet. They followed the familiar path to the oak tree, its branches heavy with leaves that whispered in the warm breeze. Samuel's hand found hers, their fingers fitting together with the ease of many seasons. They stood in silence, watching sunlight flicker across the meadow like scattered gold. "Do you ever feel," Samuel asked softly, "that he's right here with us?" Beth smiled, her eyes tracing the gentle sway of the branches.
"I feel him everywhere," she said.
"In every heartbeat, in every breath." They lingered until the horizon blushed with the first shades of dusk. Stars began their patient unveiling, one by one, as if the universe was lighting small lanterns to guide them home. Beth closed her eyes and listened. The hum was everywhere now, not a sound but a presence, calm, endless, tender. When they returned to the house, evening settled like a lullaby. The rooms were warm with the scent of tea and the slow creak of wood cooling after the day's heat. Beth stood by the window watching fireflies drift through the garden, each tiny light a quiet echo of the stars. She felt no need to speak, no urge to search. Her heart was full of the simple truth that had unfolded over the years. Nothing loved is ever lost. The universe holds every bond, every memory, every gentle breath. As night deepened, she lay beside Samuel and let the quiet carry her toward sleep. The hum, soft and infinite, merged with the rhythm of her heartbeat, a reminder that love is the endless thread through all thing. Somewhere beyond the stars, Rick remained, neither near nor far, but everywhere, always. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.